Good evening. Really great to see you all, and we're grateful to Doug Otadi for kicking off the symposium earlier. I hope you enjoyed your dinner. I'm Doug Hicks, president of Davidson College, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. I'd like to acknowledge two of my predecessors who are here. They love it when I do this. Reverend Bobby Vaught is here, president emeritus of Davidson College. Reverend Dr. John Kirkendall, president emeritus. Thanks for spending your Monday evening here. I can't imagine a richer place for a conversation, and we're grateful for our special guest who will bring his ideas this evening. It's so good to be together. In these complex and challenging times, I've been deeply grateful for the enduring commitments of Davidson College, grounded in our statement of purpose and in the Reformed tradition. We educate students by cultivating their humane instincts and discipline and creative minds for lives of leadership and service. We honor the dignity and worth of every human person, lived out through a community that recruits and supports members from all backgrounds. And tonight I'm eager to hear Dr. Fluker's wisdom on prayer and social justice and Howard Thurman. This lecture and the Reformed Tradition Symposium give us courage and context to understand the signs of our times, and then in the Reformed tradition to respond to them to find a path forward. I'm now honored to introduce the Reverend Daniel Heath, who will then introduce our speaker. Daniel.
Good evening again. This year's keynote speaker, Dr. Walter Earl Fluker, is no stranger to Davidson College and is returning after 20 years. He first presented as the Martin Luther King Jr. Day speaker for Davidson College on January 17th, 2005 in the 900 room, where we gathered for our opening lecture and where we will gather tomorrow. I fondly remember Dr. Fluker as a professor of philosophy and religion at my alma mater, Morehouse College, also the alma mater of Dr. King. Dr. Fluker serves as distinguished professor of the Howard Thurman Center at Hartford University for Religion and Peace, Dean's Professor of Spirituality, Ethics, and Leadership at Emory University's Candler School of Theology, and Professor Emeritus of Ethical Leadership, formerly the Martin Luther King Jr. Chair at Boston University, and the editor of the Howard Thurman Papers Project. Howard Thurman was a key mentor for Dr. King. Dr. Fluker earned a PhD in social ethics from Boston University, a Master of Divinity degree from Garrett Evangelical Seminary, and a bachelor's degree in philosophy and biblical studies from Trinity College. He is married to Dr. Sharon Watson Fluker and is the proud father of 4 children and 7 grandchildren. You can read more about Dr. Fluker in your programs. Friends, let's welcome back to Davidson College, Dr. Fluker. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. You could have said a little more. Doug at least acknowledged the emeriti. You could have added a little something on for me, but it's okay. Good evening, everybody. I am absolutely delighted to be with you. And I'm familiar with 1 or 2 faces. I'm so good to see my friend Virgil Lattimore after many years. Cast your bread on the water. And after many years, so good to see you. And to become acquainted with this incredible president who shared, like all great presidents, his vision for Davidson College with me at dinner. Doug, I am surprised that we've not crossed paths in persons. We've missed one another. Maybe in heaven we'll find another way to do that. And to Daniel Heath, Reverend Daniel Heath, Morehouse man. You see that bow tie? I told him I have my bow tie in my pocket. I have it. There's nothing like a Morehouse man. Honestly, if there really isn't. Howard Thurman, by the way, 1923, Morehouse man. You can always tell a Morehouse man, but you can't tell him much. And again, to meet people like Stephanie, Mary, Avis, Jennifer, Adrian, who walked me across campus, I am so appreciative. People don't have to be kind. And in this season, it's really a very generous grace to pay attention to the other and her needs or his needs, to be gracious, to be generous. That's why I wanted to give you a chance. We were at the dining table, and honestly, I won't talk all long tonight. Kind of like what Elizabeth Taylor said to her last husband. She said, I won't hold you long, right? But we were at the dinner table, and I think it was Stephanie's. I said, boy, I've been so sleepy lately. You know, it's like I live in the legend of Sleepy Hollow or something. You know, I'm sleepy. When I drove into Davidson, I said, this is such a sleepy town. And she said, it might be the situation, this moment we're in. It might be the way the mind is dealing with what's going on. And I turned to her and I said, and I remembered the song, why are you cast down, oh my soul? And the psalmist only says one thing that I share with you, hope in God, hope in God. And I'm gonna do more than that. I promise I won't bore you tonight. Even if I don't stay on text, I will not bore you. There's a very special place in hell for people who bore one another. I want you to learn this song with me before we get started. There's hope for this world. There's hope for this world. It's all going to be all right. There's hope for this world. Sing it with me. There's hope for this world. There's hope for this world. It's all going to be all right. Turn to your neighbor and sing it to him. Say, there's hope for. Now turn to the other way and sing it. Now let us join Howard Thurman in a meditation. Oh, how good it is to center down. Find a quiet place.
Good it is to center down, to sit quietly and see one's self pass by. The streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. Our spirits resound with clashings, with noisy silences, while something deep within hungers and thirsts for the still moment and the resting love. With full intensity, we seek ere the quiet passes a fresh sense of order in our living, a direction, a strong, sure purpose that will structure our confusion and bring meaning in our chaos. We look at ourselves in this waiting moment, the kinds of people we are. The questions persist. What are we doing with our lives? What are the motives that order our days? What is the end of our doings? Where are we trying to go? Where do we put the emphasis? And where are our values focused? For what end do we make sacrifices? Where is my treasure? And what do I love most in life? What do I hate most in life? And to what am I true? Over and over, the questions beat in upon the waiting moment. As we listen, floating up through all the jangling echoes of our turbulence, there is a sound of another kind, a deeper note which only the stillness of the heart makes clear. It moves directly to the core of our being. We wait. Our questions are answered. Our spirits refresh. And we move back into the traffic of our daily round with the peace of the eternal in our step. How good it is to center down.
Amen. Howard Washington Thurman was one of the leading religious thinkers of the 20th century, a mentor to leaders of the civil rights movement, and a mystic who pioneered influential innovations in liturgy, worship, and spirituality in the quest for common ground. His life was an extraordinary journey from Jim Crow, Florida, at the turn of the 20th century to meeting with Mahatma Gandhi in 1936, co-founding one of the first interracial and interfaith churches in the United States in 1944, and finally becoming dean of the chapel at a mainstream university at Boston University, becoming the first African-American to do so as dean of Marsh Chapel. Thurman's place in the pantheon of American religious and civic leadership has been widely celebrated recently. But what is not so well known about Thurman is that he was also a keen observer and astute interpreter of American democratic dogma. Often caricatured from within and without the African-American community as a powerful preacher, he was Life's magazine's won 10 best preachers in the 50s, for those who didn't know that. But until recently, Thurman has been ignored, or at best, considered irrelevant to the pressing social issues impacting public life in general, and Black life in particular. So this lecture is a constructive and practical reflection on the ways Thurman envisioned the contemplative life as walking with God, and its implications for the creation of what I'm going to call democratic space. At this critical impasse in democratic life and practices, in which we are witnessing the horrendous efforts to restrict and confine spaces of dissent, the free press, voting rights, the policing of female, queer, Black, and brown bodies, and the forced migration of certain immigrants, the need for a vision of democratic space that is not limited to privilege, power, and political chicanery is urgent and necessary. Thurman's vision integrates spirituality and social transformation, offering tools for navigating contested democratic spaces. His model underscores three interrelated movements that I'll share if I get that far in this thicket of words. Preparation, presence, and practice, which form the basis for cultivating a democratic ethos rooted in freedom, equality, and mutual respect. Thurman's vast corpus, over 22 books, and just in my work alone, we identified over 58,000 documents that we've been working on for 30 years. I'll probably go to my grave and we'll still be trying to find out what Thurman. But his vast corpus addresses the intersections of mysticism, embodied existence, and the struggle for justice, highlighting his deep concern for those whom he called whose backs were against the walls. In the following, I will discuss his understanding of democratic space and the ways in which the interrelated practices of preparation, presence, were related to his and our contemporary quest for social justice. That's my intention. Let's talk a little about democratic space. This is the one that will require you to be awake, so I made this first. Democratic space refers to the ongoing struggle against the reconfiguration of space and the reordering of time for subjugated bodies. This idea is represented in the political philosopher Jacques Rancière's notion of policing versus politics. Policing, for Rancière, concerns the rule that governs the body's appearing. It is the structuring of what he calls occupations and the properties of the spaces where these occupations are distributed, determining who occupies which space and under what conditions. Occupations refer to the ways in which individuals and groups occupy space and the broader implications of how those actions interact with systems of power and governance. In other words, one knows one's place in a society and where they stand in relation to power. Policing, for Rancière, is not necessarily about law enforcement in the conventional sense, but refers to the existing systems of roles, hierarchies, and distributions of power. It is the way society organizes itself to determine who has authority, who participates in decision-making, and who is counted as a legitimate political subject. You got that, right? There will be an exam. Politics, on the other hand, is, and I'm quoting, an extremely determined activity antagonistic to policing, end of quote, because it is human activity that turns on equality as its principal or basic presupposition. Politics happens when those who have been excluded from this system challenge it and demand inclusion. It calls for the emergence of a new subjectivity that disrupts the dominant order. In this sense, democracy concerns the struggle for the redefinition of the distribution of certain shares or spaces or occupations among certain groups whom Rancière calls, and I love this language, that of the part of those who have no part. Here the concern is with the demos, the common people, folks like us, I guess, everyday people, Sly Stone, who are not accounted for in the configuration of power. Those relegated to animal life with sound, but who cannot speak. For Thurman, it meant to be ignored, I'm quoting him, to be passed over as of no account and of no meaning, to be made into a faceless thing, not a man, I would add woman, or human. It is to act with no accounting, to go nameless up and down the streets of other minds where no salutation greets and no sign is given to mark the place one calls one's own. End of quote. Nonetheless, we know that these bodies do dare to speak, break, shift, and redefine the spaces they have been assigned. Maybe right before COVID, you can kind of remember some of that, if you have a long memory. And it is precisely because they dare to use speech, as in logos, that they reveal the process of equality, because only a free human can truly speak. In a meditation on his favorite scripture, Psalm 139, Thurman loved Psalm 139. Thou knowest it all together. This is in 1960. You can find it on Emory's digital archive. Thurman speaks to the integrity, power, and sacramentality of speech. The power of the word not only to convey meaning, but as a defiant act of courage, justice, and compassion that counteracts fear, deception, and hatred. For Thurman, the integrity and power of the spoken word challenges and disrupts not only discourse and practices that sustain privilege and position, but the veritable habitus, Presbyterians like that word, that guards and hides in silence, the unacknowledged value gap that masquerades as normative and moral. He often quoted Petrarch's Letters of an Old Age. Petrarch says, when a word must be spoken to further a good cause, and those whom it behooves to speak remain silent, anybody ought to raise his or her voice and break the silence fraught with evil. Many a time a few simple words have helped further the welfare of the nation, no matter who uttered them. The voice itself displaying the latent powers suffice to move the hearts of human beings. So friends, you got all of that. That was good. So beyond Rancière's definition of politics, Thurman's imaginative theopolitical project seeks something akin to parousia, arrival, the coming to itself of the full body, embodied presence that signifies expectation, advent, celebration, and extends into political speech as a perilous traversing of the limits. So when policing shows up and boundaries are set, the body defies policing. This is a radical idea. Am I the only one that's feeling that? Thurman, in Reading Spirituality and Social Transformation, provides a way, I think, to construct possibilities for new spaces, democratic spaces, new times, and new rhythms for historically marginalized and despised bodies that counteract and counterpose the cultural productions of evil and the incarceration of human bodies. Therefore, beyond the facility of speech as a mark of rationality, it used to be rational communication. By that I mean, once upon a time you get in an argument, you have a serious debate, and then you don't turn around and kill the person because it's a rational argument, right? So beyond the facility of speech as a mark of rationality, in this brief discussion, I am interested in the human capacity for effective experiences, occurrences in the world, or aesthetic events that cannot be merely thought, but are embodied and experienced in the sense of freedom and equality. Just imagine someone showing up in a body that you despise and sharing space with you. That's what I'm trying to say. You feel that? Erykah Badu said, did you feel that? Thurman's creative understanding of prayer and social justice, therefore, provides a way to construct possibilities for new spaces, new times, and new rhythms for historically marginalized and despise bodies, and for gathering and spreading a communal ethos in and beyond institutionalized religious space. Thurman was good at working in institutions, but he never could quite make it work in institutions. I don't know how to say that better. It's kind of a paradox. In fact, he didn't make it too well at BU, though he made BU kind of famous because he kind of colored outside the lines. Thurman's praxis of engaging contested democratic space, I'm going to suggest, grows out of a long history of resisting chattel slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and the terror of the rope. He grew up during an era when lynching was a Sunday affair after church. Therefore, while his notion of democracy references historical documents like the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Emancipation Proclamation, one cannot assume that democratic space for Thurman was the same as it was for American founding fathers or European intellectuals and philosophers. Democratic space for Thurman demonstrates both the claiming of the right and the moral duty to dissent, to disagree, based upon the radical freedom and the inherent dignity and worth of the individual within the context of his own life, Black suffering. So his perspective on prayer as an act of social justice is both an imaginative conjuring of sequestered space and a demand for the reconfiguration of history and memory. This rests for him on a return to the re-narration of creation. If you read Thurman's The Search for Common Ground, he has Adam and Eve in the garden, and they get kicked out of the garden. You kind of remember that story, right? And when they get ready to come back, Thurman says they cannot get back unless they pass the angel with the flaming sword. He said they can never be innocent again, though. But if they can get past the angel, they have the possibility of being good. You might talk about that a little later. I'm just kind of scurrying through this. Y'all feel that? I'm Baptist. I'm not Methodist. I have to know you with me. You with me? All right. Especially when you're digging through stuff like this. Let me move on. So, for Thurman, prayer, the inner life, or inner awareness, refer to more than mere formal discursive activity of the mind, but rather it includes the entire range of self-awareness and bodily affectation of the individual. That is, people have feelings, they feel things. The cultivation of the inner life is the basis for the development of a genuine sense of self and authentic bodily existence in the world. Therefore, it is not sufficient simply to focus on the inner life without being aware and engaged in the complex social, political, economic arrangements that order and structure the individual's embodied existence. Preparation, presence, and practices. How much time do I have? It's 7:30. Do I have a timekeeper? Do we have to stop at a certain time? I need to know because you all are Presbyterians. I understand. I know the Reformed tradition order. Is it good? I'm good? Okay, I just don't want to go over the line. So, preparation, presence, and practices, and the fluid center of consent. Thurman often spoke of the cultivation of the inner life as walking with God. Walking with God for Thurman signals something more than personal fulfillment and nurture of the individual's contemplative life. Rather, it spoke to the very fiber of democratic life and its promise embodied in the interrelated notions of freedom and equality, of dignity and worth. It also required the hard work of preparation, cultivating a sense of presence and engaging in practices that assured continued devotion and development of the inner life and worldly speech, affection, action, and faith in the possibility of democratic space. I would like for you to imagine these moments of preparation, presence, and practice, not linearly, but as a spiral, as a spiraling movement in what Thurman calls the fluid center of consent. In his favorite book of meditations, The Inward Journey, he begins with the following: there is in every person an inward sea, and in that sea there is an island, and on that island there is an altar, and standing guard before that altar is the angel with the flaming sword. Nothing can get by that angel to be placed upon that altar unless it has the mark of your inner authority. Nothing passes the angel with the flaming sword to be placed upon your altar unless it be part of the fluid area of your consent. This is your crucial link with the eternal. The fluid area, or center, I like to call it, of consent refers to an interior space that makes available to those who are concerned about contested democratic spaces the resources to live into and to live a life characterized by a sense of the vital that extends into the larger orbit of the social world and our struggles for justice. Having served as a teacher, pastor, and counselor to many leaders over 55 years, Thurman was insistent that those who were committed to social change make an inward journey to the creative and precarious encounter with the angel with the flaming sword. There, he argued, one discovers what is literal and irreducible in their being, an authentic and indivisible site of meaning and belonging. It is also a source of knowledge, freedom, empathy, love, and imagination that marks one's encounter with the eternal. These effective products of this creative encounter are also what I like to call with Thurman tools of the spirit. In a moving, intimate meditation on his first experience of viewing the coast of Africa, he writes this. This is from his autobiography. From my cabin window, I look out on the full moon and the ghost of my forefathers, I would add mothers, rise and fall with the undulating waves. Across these same waters, how many years ago they came? What were the inchoate mutterings locked tight within the circle of their hearts? In the deep, heavy darkness of the foul-smelling hold of the ship, where they could not see the sky, nor the night noises, nor hear the night noises, nor feel the warm compassion of the tribe, they held their breath against agony. And he asked, how does the human spirit accommodate itself to desolation? How did they? What tools of the spirit were in their hands with which to cut a path through the wilderness of their despair? It should be clear then that for Thurman, walking with God is more than a casual walk down a tree-lined orchard grove with a companion, fingering prayer beads, or learning the latest technique of walking and breathing under the direction of a spiritual advisor. You should do that if you need it, but I'm just saying, Thurman is asking for something. Rather, walking with God for Thurman is far more costly and dangerous. In his last letter to Martin Luther King Jr., dated May 13, 1966, Thurman expresses his regret for the time that had elapsed since he and King last spoke. He ends the short note with a rather foreboding quote from the American naturalist and essayist Lauren Isley. I quote, and she uses dialect, "Those us hunts treasure must go alone. At night, when they find it, they have to leave a little of their blood behind them." This was 1 year before King's assassination. To walk with God is to enter dangerous territory without a map, to perilously traverse the limit, to trespass embodied and structural boundaries set by policing of racial, ethnic, cultural, gender, sexual, and religious bodies. It is to cross into forbidden territory of unjust laws and legal prohibitions, and to remember, retell, and relive stories of a part of those who have no part, who dare to speak, feel, and act. It is a confrontation with evil that lurks in the shadows and in open gaze, within us and around us, mocking us and demanding that we see our complicity with horror, begging us to return to a fluid center where we rediscover what our hands and legs are for, and to inquire with Thurman, how does the human spirit accommodate itself to desolation? How did his ancestors, what tools of the spirit were in their hands with which to cut a path through the wilderness of their despair? What methods, strategies, practices of the Spirit are available to us at Davidson College to cut away this ghastly conundrum of evil, disguise, and repeated lies of a fascist masquerade? I know you know what I'm talking about. How do we, Christians and others with whom we're willing to journey alongside, prepare to encounter presence and to practice in and through presence acts of justice, compassion in contested democratic space? What tools of the Spirit are in our hands that can help us carve out a fresh path for people who are quickly losing hope? Do I have 15 minutes? I just want to know. It's like waking up in hell. You know, you're doing something, and somebody said, hey, man, I didn't get that last part. You know? So, preparation. In 1963, Thurman published a small book entitled Disciplines of the Spirit. Took me 5 years to understand this book. Honestly, I'm very slow. The book grew out of a 2-semester course on spiritual resources and disciplines of the spirit he taught at Boston University from 1953 to 1962. Among his many students were some who became celebrated pioneers in religious studies, interreligious faith, and social activism. These included Houston Smith, some call him Houston Smith, you know, the proper name, you know. Houston Smith, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, and Walter Panicki. In Disciplines of the Spirit, Thurman identified 5 regular spiritual practices: commitment, growth, prayer, suffering, and reconciliation. These practices were designed, and I'm quoting him, to allow students to clear away whatever may block our awareness of that which is God in us. Because of time, tonight we'll look at only 2, commitment and prayer. Fundamental to preparation for the work of creating democratic space for Thurman is the act of commitment. Commitment. When I do commitment, Mr. President, I normally draw 2 little pear-shaped objects on a board, you know, 2 pairs on a line. And I said, you know, you got to put that on the line. That's commitment. But commitment for Thurman involves, he's more respectable. Commitment involves volition, which may be a radical self-conscious yielding on the part of the individual or a systematic disciplined effort over a period of time. I often tell students, sometimes, you know, when you're doing vocation, formation, it's good just to follow the breadcrumbs. Sometimes it doesn't burst. Often, more than likely, it won't burst in all at once, but follow the breadcrumbs, a disciplined effort over time. The result of the commitment, says Thurman, is the agent is a new integrated, in the agent is a new integrated basis for moral action, a new value content and center of loyalty that informs one's actions in the world. The person's loyalty to God, which proceeds from personal assurance of being loved by God, forms the ground of the moral life. What is discovered in private must be witnessed in the world. Thurman comments on the nature of the individual's commitment and its relation to moral action. He says his experience, her experience, is personal, private, but in no sense exclusive. All of the vision of God and holiness which she experiences, she must achieve in the context of the social situation which day-to-day life is defined. What is disclosed in her religious experience, she must define in community. That which God shared with her, she must inspire her fellows to seek for themselves. She is dedicated, therefore, to removing of all barriers which block or frustrate this possibility in the world. Prayer. Now I'm almost done. That means whoever's doing the slides, I'm gonna cut a whole lot at the end. Prayer. Preparation for Thurman also involved a readying of the mind and spirit, which he sometimes calls prayer or meditation. He wasn't big on petitionary prayer. I know we do a lot of that, but he didn't do it a lot. He didn't counsel a lot of long story behind that. Prayer is a discipline for Thurman by which the individual prepares or readies her spirit for the creative encounter with the fluid center. Especially in the experience of meditation, the individual centers down, as in the meditation earlier, quiets the stirring of the mind so that the presence of God residing within the person may come to itself. Presence for Thurman emerges as expectation, sensation, imaginative yearning, and a coming of God in oneself. It's a veritable parousia, an arrival, and a celebration that brings newness, possibility, and hope that extends into political engagement. There are some stories here that I'm passing on prayer, but one is really funny. He's on his way to Nigeria, and he's really dealing with his own. Some of us have dealt with this. You know, he's retired. He's trying to get a visa to Nigeria. If you've ever been to Nigeria, you know exactly what he's talking about. And he's also dealing with his own finitude, death. And he's overcome. And he goes into a chapel at the airport in London, and he prays. And he says he noticed two Catholic priests, no offense to Catholics, who came in and they just got the business done real quick, and they left. But he and another young woman just stayed in there. And then he tells another instance where in this moment, all at once, he's enveloped by the presence. And he said he didn't know where it came from, but it just arrived at once, and his eyes were moist, and his mind was settled. And later that night, he slept for the first time. You know, it's a little note out of his private journals. So Thurman actually did pray. You know, he wasn't just like a lot of academics, you know, who write about it. He actually prayed. I'm closing with a conclusion. So you'll go past the slide person. You'll be going past a lot. But I want to say for Thurman, commitment and prayer were intricately and ethically bound to doing the hard work of what he called neighborliness and reimagining democratic space that is an emphatically spiritual and ethical enterprise that includes the three fluid, interrelated moments of preparation. I prepare, I allow presence to lead, and then there's practice. I gotta practice. If I'm gonna be a great tennis player, I gotta practice. If I'm gonna ride the bicycle, I gotta practice. If I'm gonna be a great virtuoso, I gotta practice. His life and work as pastor, preacher, teacher, and counselor to generations of activists, not just King, whom we know about, but to Derek Bell. Anybody know that name? The big debate over critical race? Derek Bell, Vincent Harding, Lerone Bennett. I mean, the real radicals, Black consciousness movement. Thurman had them there in San Francisco. Jesse Jackson used to come to Thurman's home, and he would not even allow the people, he always had an entourage, if you knew Jesse. He would not allow those who were with him to even sit in a chair when they spoke with Howard Thurman. And Thurman thought it was the most hilarious thing, but this is what I mean, the kind of people who can. So his life and work as pastor, preacher, teacher, counselor to generations of activists was to find ways to create expanding and inclusive democratic spaces of mutuality and respect for those whose backs were against the wall. His various ministries were all spaces where he experimented with the possibility of creative spiritual foundations for democracy. The Fellowship Church was one site where it was really for him an experiment in democracy. He called what the people who would come out apostles of sensitiveness. Barbara Brown Taylor calls them eccentric apostles, but apostles of sensitiveness who would establish beachheads in American society. Thurman felt this practice of democracy was both spiritual and ethical, and that these practices of the inner life prepared one for the existential and embodied engagement with the larger society. So in conclusion, his was a call to return to the foundational principles of freedom and equality as ethical guides for the nation. He was under no illusion about the fulfillment of the promises of democracy in America, nor was he ignorant of the atrocious and cowardly acts of those who failed to be guided by those noble ideals. Yet he believed firmly that if a new birth of freedom were to truly emerge, if a national identity that celebrated reason, inclusion, belonging, and the highest ethical ideals were to be achieved, it would come only through a relentless reckoning with our past and a bold daring to reappropriate its hard-learned lessons for the present. For Thurman, America's search for its soul was also a search for a usable past. This past, however, was not simply the monolithic past of the founding fathers. Rather, it was the remembering and reconstruction of a diverse past of many voices and many visions. During his later years, Thurman hoped for another creative moment for America, when these new ambassadors, these apostles of sensitiveness, would come forth bearing the dream of community. For him, the eschatological hope for America and the world was bound to the struggle of oppressed peoples everywhere and the expanding of boundaries, walls, and restrictions of any kind on the freedom and equality of the individual. For those who dared enter the dangerous, no trespassing zones of race, gender, class, religion, sexuality, territorialism, and all barriers that separated brothers and sisters from one another, Thurman extended to them an invitation to walk with God, because he believed that community cannot feed for long on itself. It can only flourish where always the boundaries are giving way to the coming of others from beyond them, unknown and undiscovered sisters and brothers. Thank you.